Welcome to the Bible Department PodClass from Whitefield Academy, a Christ-centered college preparatory school serving pre-K through 12th grade in Atlanta, Georgia. Join us for an inside look at the vibrant, engaging, and transformative biblical teaching shaping our students every single day, straight from the dynamic teachers who bring it to life. In this episode, 11th grade Christian thought teacher Bowen unpacks the mystery of the Trinity, what it is, why it matters, and how his hungry students try to explain it with potatoes and pancakes. So sit back, take a listen, and enjoy. Bible class is now in session.
Here's a tip. Never try to explain the Christian doctrine of the Holy Trinity on an empty stomach. I made this mistake one afternoon last November when I assigned a new project to my 6th period Christian thought class. Christian thought is the name we give to Whitefield's 11th grade Bible class, given that much of the course examines the foundational biblical and theological doctrines of the Christian church. We guide students through fundamental teachings about who God is, the purpose of creation, the coming of Jesus Christ, and how he redeems us to live in relationship with our Maker. My name is Bowen. I've been a part of the faculty at Whitefield Academy for 4 years. I find this work such a blessing, helping to shape the minds of young people and challenge them to see the living and active Jesus at work in every area of their lives. In addition to my duties as a freshman literature teacher in the English department, I also teach one of our 6 Christian thought class periods. Prior to joining Whitfield's faculty, I was a teaching pastor, so the class is certainly in my wheelhouse, but sometimes even something as simple as an empty stomach can inject confusion into a class lesson. But let me back up a bit. We'd spent the last several weeks digging into the 2nd curriculum unit, which delves into the doctrine of the Holy Trinity, the essential belief that God is 3 in 1, Father, Son, and Spirit, dwelling together in perfect unity. To better understand this almost incomprehensible concept, we studied several of the early Christian creeds, statements of belief that emerged from the ecumenical councils of the 3rd and 5th centuries. Today, we know these statements by names such as the Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed, the Chalcedonian Creed, and a couple of others. Now, you've likely heard them recited before, and depending on your specific worshiping tradition, you may even say one every Sunday in worship. In my Anglican church, in response to the morning's assigned gospel reading, the congregation recites the Nicene Creed in unison. I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and of all things visible and invisible, and in one Lord Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son of God, begotten of his Father before all worlds, God of God, light of light, very God of very God, begotten, not made, being of one substance with the Father, and on it goes. For Christians who are less familiar with the formative history of the early church, as despite waves of persecution, faith in Jesus grew and spread across the world, the words of these ancient creeds and the concepts that they painstakingly endeavor to articulate may seem odd, even unnecessary. And yet, as I explain to my students, the creeds of the early church are not extraneous to Christian belief, nor are they mere relics of dusty antiquity. As the students in my 6th period class have learned, they are carefully crafted declarations of what makes the Christian faith uniquely transformative. From the Latin credo, meaning believe, the creeds serve to both clarify and specify the indispensable tenets of the Christian faith, what it has historically meant to believe and contemplate and pray as Christians. In a time when the followers of Christ were scattered across the known world, from the British Isles to Saharan Africa to the Himalayas, the creeds were consequential expressions of faith that helped to unify the church in difficult times. Speaking of unity, perhaps the most brain-bending doctrine communicated in the creeds is the Christian belief in a God who is both 3 and 1. A God about whom Moses can proclaim, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one," and yet whom we find in both the Old and New Testaments is pleased to reveal the full substance of his presence through 3 distinct natures, as Father, as Son, and as Spirit. one God who can walk amongst men and say, I and the Father are one, and all that belongs to the Father is mine. That is why I said the Spirit will receive from me what he will make known to you. The Trinity is a holy mystery of the faith. Yet while it may seem impossible for mortals to fully comprehend, it should not be dismissed as insignificant or peripheral. After all, within the concept of the Trinity, this is what I explain to my students, is the understanding that God values unity because he dwells in perfect unity. He champions love because he lives in unending love shared between Father, Son, and Spirit. He desires community and relationship and intimacy among all believers because in his Trinitarian expression, he is a God of community and relationship and intimacy. So what does understanding this have to do with empty stomachs, you may be wondering? Well, explaining the Trinity always presents problems because when human beings look for earthly symbols or analogies to better illustrate this holy mystery, they inevitably struggle to uphold the mystical supernatural reality carefully articulated in the creeds. Historically, humans' attempt to logically decipher the three persons of the Trinity has resulted in unorthodox ideas and heretical teachings that can have a domino effect on believers' understanding of who God truly is. One particular destructive heresy from the time of the creeds was Arianism, espoused in the 3rd and 4th centuries by a devout believer named Arius, who asserted that Jesus could not be co-eternal with the Father and was rather the first of God's created beings. He famously wrote, "There was a time when the Son was not," and he stated that while the Son may be considered divine, he is of a lesser divinity than the Father. Now, Arius' ideas were rightly controversial, but there was a brief period in which his teachings seemed to become the accepted interpretation by many. However, at the First Ecumenical Council of Nicaea, in which that Nicene Creed was born, the gathered bishops and elders of the church rejected Arianism and composed a creedal statement attentive to the co-equal, co-eternal nature of Jesus, who had said quite plainly, "I and the Father are one," and about whom was written, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning." Now, there have, of course, been many other misunderstandings of the Trinity. There's modalism, which states that God is one and he chooses to operate in certain modes or masks at certain times. Sometimes he's Father, sometimes he's Spirit, sometimes he's Son. If you've heard someone explain the Trinity using the 3 states of water, you've encountered modalism. And then there's partialism, which is usually illustrated, albeit unintentionally, by the egg analogy. Have you heard that one? An egg has 3 parts, the shell, the white, the yolk. So the problem with this analogy is that it insinuates the persons of the Trinity are only parts of God, not fully God in themselves. God becomes a kind of Voltron, the sum of 3 incomplete parts. And this is where the project came in for my students. Having spent several days walking through these lofty concepts with them, I handed them the theological keys. I put them in partners, and I tasked each group with developing their own analogy for the Trinity, one that had not been popularly employed in church history before. Now, I encouraged them to think of things that come in threes, and then I instructed them to determine an illustration to explain the doctrine of the Trinity to someone. Now, at the same time, knowing no analogy is perfect, I also instructed them to identify the strengths of their analogy as well as its weaknesses. In what ways did their analogy effectively depict the persons of the Trinity? And in what ways did it lean toward one of the many heresies we'd studied? Now, I should say, they eventually passed this assignment with flying colors, coming up with incredibly insightful illustrations that I never would have thought up on my own. But on that first November afternoon of brainstorming, I set them to work and sat down at my desk to observe, and that's when I realized I'd made one small yet crucial error in my lesson plan. This year at Whitefield, due to the size of the classes, we have to break upper school lunch into 2 sections. Most seniors and juniors have C lunch from 12:20 to 12:50, while the majority of sophomores and freshmen have D lunch from 12:55 to 1:25. Now, D lunchers have not been happy with having to wait through their 4th class for chow time, but there's a catch for everyone. You see, in our rotating schedule, students' lunch assignments each day depend on what teacher you have for your fourth class, and teachers' lunches stay consistent throughout. As such, for many of the 11th graders in my Christian Thought class, I'm their only D lunch teacher, which means every G day, their schedule falls in such a way that they must wait for the later lunch period. Needless to say, G days in 6th period Christian Thought get a bit squirmy. There are occasional protests and growls, mostly from students' stomachs. But the bigger problem is it can affect their classwork, and such was the case for this project. Only a few minutes into their brainstorming time, I had students pitching me a variety of analogies for the Trinity, but one thing they all had in common? They were all food-based. Okay, Mr. Bowen, check it out. What about potatoes? What about potatoes, Sam? Think about it. You got baked potatoes, mashed potatoes, potatoes au gratin. There it is, the Trinity. Sam, how is that not modalism? No, check it out. How about chocolate? Oh, I'm sorry, chocolate, Joel? Yeah, you got milk chocolate, white chocolate, dark chocolate. It's perfect. I wouldn't say it's perfect. Mr. Bowen, we've got it. What do you got, Micah? Pancake batter. Pancake batter. Yeah, pancake batter. Think about it. They always insisted all I needed to do was think about it. You can use pancake batter to make pancakes, waffles, or crepes. Same substance, different expressions. I think it's perfect. I think you're hungry. The moral of all this is twofold. First, it can be a deeply edifying endeavor to spend some time contemplating the mysteries of God, in particular the supernatural beauty of his Trinitarian nature. But don't shy away from thinking about hard things. Too many Christians are content to say, it's a mystery, just accept it. But I would counter that by saying, it's a mystery. Strive to embrace it. And second, before you have a conversation with someone about the doctrine of the Trinity, maybe grab a banana or a protein bar first. Such conversations are better had on a full stomach. This is just one example of the many different conversations and lessons that we get to teach to these students in the Bible department here at Whitefield. It's always a joy and it's always a challenging, edifying experience, both for the students and for us. My name is Bowen, and I really hope that you have enjoyed listening to this episode.